This video will have everything you need to decide on buying a GPU in November of 2025. Yes, there's already some early Black Friday deals and everything. However, there's also the question of should you just wait for the RTX 50 supercards, because that's been a lot of people's plan over the last couple of months. However, it's looking like the 50 supercards are going to be delayed extremely later than what was initially leaked and rumored. So if you've been planning on waiting for this, we're just seeing more and more mounting leaks, making it sound like Q3 of 2026 is probably going to be the soonest we would see them. So we'd seen some initial leaks about this, and we're now seeing another round kind of confirming this, showing that board partners who would need to know some information ahead of time to get ready for this still don't have any technical specs or any plans of producing these. So in other words, it'll be a while. So I'm not saying you have to run out and buy a GPU right now. If you're happy with the one you have, go ahead and stick with it. But if you were like desperate for a new GPU, but you were like, oh, I heard that those 50 supers were coming with more VRAM in like the end of 2025, does not look like that's going to be realistically the case. Of course, all of that is leaks and rumors territories. Now, what if you actually are going to be buying a GPU right now? I think that for the mainstream buyer, the best choices are either the 5060 Ti 16GB or the AMD 9060 XT 16GB if your budget isn't quite as high. More on why in a second, but first, you know that feeling when you just listen to a 6-hour podcast and now you want to find some direct quote from that? Well, GetRecallAI, sponsored link in the video description, can absolutely help you with this. Recall is an AI-powered knowledge base / personal AI encyclopedia that lets you summarize, save, chat with, and always recall content that you care about, from all your online content to your own personal notes. There's a web app, a mobile app, and what I'm showing you right now is the Recall browser extension. So not only can it give you a summary, but also you can get a text transcript, and it's doing this from Spotify. There's a lot of tools out there that aren't compatible with stuff. This can do Spotify, it can do YouTube, it can do your own notes, it can do various websites, PDFs, whatever. Throw it in there, good chance it's going to work. And not only can I get the summary and with timestamps, a transcript, all of that. Also notice I can save this and bring it into my main Recall page. And here, notice it gets automatically categorized under history, World War II, everything's here. I can refer to this later, chat with it, generate quizzes to study it, all sorts of stuff. It's also great for, let's say you're researching building your own gaming PC. Maybe you watched my hour-long video about that, and then Hardware Unboxed comes out with their video. Oh no, what should I go with? How are they similar? How are they different? Well, check this out. Not only can you generate a graph of this content where you can see my video, see their video, and then you can see where there's overlap between these pieces of content. Like, ooh, are we both recommending the Montex Century 2? Maybe I should click on that, find out more about it. Boom, I can learn that this is a power supply, ATX 3.1, 80 plus gold, various content, pulls all that up right there. But also I can chat with my knowledge base, not just with the internet. I can chat with specifically these pieces of content that I'm talking about here. And I can ask a question and refer back to the question that I already asked earlier today. So comparison of Daniel's PC advice and Hardware Unboxed recommendations. And you can see timestamp to both videos where it's getting these comparisons between that. So this can be great if you're researching the PC parts that you want to buy. Recall has other great features like augmented browsing, where you can see that keywords get highlighted and link back to other pieces of content you've already saved on that same idea. Like here, it's referring back to one of my other videos related to this topic. And use code Owen25 to get yourself 25% off a premium subscription to Recall until December 1st, 2025. So click the link in the video description or pinned comment today. Now, why am I saying that the 5060 Ti 16GB or 9060 XT 16GB would be the best options for the mainstream gamer? And don't worry, I've got options for if you have a higher budget or a lower budget, but let's start with this kind of mainstream segment. So here's the thing. First of all, make sure you're getting the 16GB version of both of these cards. Both of them have an 8GB version, and those are, again, same performance when you don't spill over VRAM capacity, but games released in the last couple of years, many of them go over 8GB very easily, and that's going to continue to be the case moving into the future. That will get worse. So I wouldn't recommend the average person buy a GPU right now that could already give you problems, will continue to give you more problems moving into the future. So make sure we're looking at these 16 gigabyte options if you're in this price point. We'll talk about if you have a much lower budget, then you can make 8 gigabytes work. But so first of all, make sure we're talking about these 16 gigabyte options. Second of all, these are going to give you a good experience in any game that's out right now at 1080p or 1440p, which are the mainstream gaming monitor resolutions. And yes, sometimes that does mean using upscaling like DLSS4 or FSR4. And I think that those actually look really good. And so you can get a good experience in these. You can otherwise leave most of the graphic settings maxed out due to the VRAM capacity and have a good experience. Now, speaking of that, that gets into how we could then decide, okay, but between the two, which one should you pick? And the honest answer is their raw performance is very similar, but on average, the 5060 Ti is slightly faster. But that raw performance differential wouldn't really make or break anything for me. Although if they were offered you at the same price, you would obviously take the one that's slightly faster. But there's also the ecosystem differences. NVIDIA does have slightly better upscaler with DLSS4. I also think their frame generation tends to have slightly smoother frame pacing. They also offer a multi-frame gen when AMD still just has a single frame gen. So in other words, there's some nice to haves with the NVIDIA ecosystem that is still a little bit better than the AMD ecosystem. But to be clear, AMD has decreased that gap in feature set significantly with their 9000 series compared to if you'd been shopping, one generation ago. AMD's ray tracing performance in anything besides the heaviest path tracing workloads has mostly closed the gap. And again, the FSR4 upscaling is extremely usable, unlike the previous versions of FSR. So I think you have a really good experience on both of these. But again, if they cost the same, I would absolutely take the 5060 Ti for slightly more performance. They have the same VRAM capacity and the better ecosystem with the NVIDIA features. That being said, right now, the 5060 Ti, the lowest price model I can find is $420, which is a little bit below the MSRP, but is also offering a $20 rebate form, which can be a bit of a hassle, but perhaps you count that, and that would bring it down to $400. The best pricing I can find on the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte right now is $360. So that is, again, if we're not factoring in the mail-in rebate, we're talking a $60 price gap here. That's not insignificant. So the AMD card is offering a little better performance per dollar, but what I would really say is I would still rather have the 5060 Ti. So if 420 or 400 if you count the rebate is in your budget, then I think that this is worth that. However, I also think you'd have a really good experience on the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte. So if you just want a graphics card right now and you need to be noticeably under $400 to make it work in your budget, or if you're building a whole gaming PC and you could use that extra $60 to be the difference between a solid CPU and a terrible CPU or something like that, then you got to think about, those trade-offs. So in other words, if that $60, either you don't have it or it could be better used in your build on other performance-affecting features, I think that the 9060 XT also makes a ton of sense here. Now, let's talk about what if you actually have more money than this? You're like, okay, I could actually afford a bit more than $400. Is there anything worth stretching for? And I think the next two GPUs worth stretching for are either the 5070, which is currently marked down considerably off its normal price due to Black Friday sales, or the 9070 XT from AMD, if you can go a little bit further in your budget, because it's finally come down to its MSRP. So let's talk about these now. Let's also talk about how much better are they than staying back at the lesser priced options, and then deciding between these two, the 5070 and the 9070 XT. First of all, they're not direct price competitors. In the current market, the 5070 is marked down to $500 on the lowest price models, and there's actually a rebate again, whether you count that or not due to the hassle, up to you, but that would bring its total down to $480. So its MSRP being $550, this is actually pretty significantly discounted. The main issue with the 5070 is the 12 gigabytes of VRAM, and yes, it's frustrating that you could buy a less expensive card with 16 with the 5060 Ti, or even a lot less expensive with the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte versus spending more money on a 5070 with only 12. Well, here's the thing. Most games at 1080p or 1440p even at their max settings, stay within a 12 gigabyte VRAM buffer right now. However, some of them at their max settings do spill over 12 gigabytes, even at 1080p or 1440p. That being said, it usually only takes small tweaks in the graphics settings menu to get back under the 12, in which case, when you're not spilling over the 12 gigabytes of VRAM, the 5070 is significantly faster than the 5060 Ti and the 9060 XT. So I do think if you have the additional money, I would, of course, rather have the 5070 than the 5060 Ti or the 9060 XT, just because it is so much faster and the 12 gigabytes of VRAM isn't super problematic. However, you do have to start thinking about in the long term, the number of games where you're going to have to tweak graphics settings will increase because over time, games tend to be developed with, higher VRAM targets in mind. I would expect the main flip for when that starts to be extremely problematic in most releases would probably be whenever we get the PS6, which we don't know at this point, could be 2027, 2028, because then I think the higher graphic settings in games would start to be targeting that platform, which I think will have a lot more than 12 gigabytes of VRAM available for game development. So really, 5070s, okay right now. You occasionally have to turn things down a little bit, but other than that, it has a ton of performance, and it is, like I said, significantly discounted right now. So it just kind of has that one little hang up. Now, if you have even more money, if you can go beyond the $500 price point, if you can reach $600, I would definitely rather have a 9070 XT, which has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, by the way, than the 5070. Now, this is back to the AMD options, but AMD's 9070 XT is really more of a 5070 Ti competitor. It is noticeably faster than the 5070 non-Ti. But we are spending $100 more to get here. Now, why am I not comparing it with the 5070 Ti? Well, the 5070 Ti right now isn't really discounted. It's still at its $750 price point. And again, so here the 9070 XT is basically getting you that performance for $150 less. And all you're really missing out on is that NVIDIA kind of ecosystem. So sure, if you have the extra $150 and you're willing to spend that on that ecosystem, you could do that. But if we're talking best value right now, the 9070 XT is kind of the most expensive GPU before you start getting significantly diminishing returns. Past this point, you're spending $150 just for the NVIDIA kind of ecosystem feature set, which maybe if you have the budget, fine, do that. Then get the 5070 Ti. And beyond the 5070 Ti, you're talking NVIDIA competition, 5080, it's extremely diminishing returns, price to performance past that. And 5090, I mean, if you have $2,000 to $3,000 for a GPU, by that it is the best one. It's diminishing returns, but hey, if that's in your budget, it's really powerful. But so basically, if we're talking value-oriented GPU purchasing, the 9070 XT is really kind of where it's topping out right now. Now, the 9070 XT is a great 1440p graphics card for everything except for path tracing. For path tracing, it does fall short even of the 5070 non-Ti. And that's where, again, that's another thing that the 5070 Ti version, that extra $150 might be getting you. But other than path tracing, which is not in a bunch of titles at this point, the 9070 XT is going to mop the floor with the 5070 non-Ti, and would at least basically match the 5070 Ti for $150 less. Again, FSR 4 is looking really good, very usable, and Optiscaler can solve the unsupported games issues, and AMD has been doing a good job of getting support increased there. So basically, where we're at so far is if you can go up to a $600 budget, the 9070 XT does make sense. If you have an even higher budget, stretching to the 5070 Ti makes sense, and beyond that, it's kind of like, I don't know, if you just keep having money to throw at it, you can keep throwing things at it, but we're talking best value GPUs today. If $500 is your absolute max, I do think the 5070 non-Ti version does still make sense. Even with the 12 gigabytes of VRAM, just be aware that headache will be available, but you are getting a lot of performance for this price point. And again, if you can stretch to the $600, you can solve the VRAM issue with the 9070 XT. Like I said, for the mainstream buyer that wants to spend $400 or less, 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte and 9060 XT 16 gigabyte, great options. And again, it's really just what fits in your budget there. However, what if you don't have this much money? And I've got to say that anything lower than this, you are starting to take some considerable compromises. So if you don't just need to buy a GPU right now, I would recommend just saving up until you can hit this level. If you really just aren't happy with your gaming setup right now, this is where we can consider some more budget options, but you are going to be taking a hit in various ways. So the next step down from here that makes any sense to purchase is the 9060 XT 8GB version. Now this does save you a significant amount of money compared to the 16GB version. It's available as low as $260 right now. Now, it has the same base level of performance as the 16GB version, meaning from a price to performance perspective, this is probably the best GPU out there right now. That being said, 8 gigabytes is really annoying right now. Now, if you pretty much exclusively play competitive online games and or older games, and you're not really playing the latest AAA single-player games with the graphics turned up, and when you're playing online games, you tend to turn down graphic settings in order to have a competitive frame rate advantage and like easier to spot enemies with less clutter. If that's your playstyle, then I think this 9060 XT 8GB will actually be a really good fit for you. Again, it'd be nice to have the 16 if you can fit into your budget. If you can't, or if you're making a super budget-oriented whole build right now and you're like, I need to fit in a CPU, especially if you're playing competitive games, throwing that additional like $100 difference between this and the 16GB version, it is a $100 difference right now on the lowest price models. That extra $100 might be the difference between a crappy CPU, and if you're playing online competitive games with turned down graphic settings, you might actually end up CPU limited if you cheap out too much on the CPU. So there is definitely situations where this 8GB 9060 XT is actually going to be the best choice for your build or for your system in your budget. Tons of performance per dollar here. But like I said, in the latest AAA games, 8 gigabytes does not allow you to max out the graphic settings on a card that's otherwise strong enough to max out the graphic settings. So it will certainly be annoying. But for a certain play style, I think this can make sense. Now, if you just have to go even lower than that, you can save an additional $30, and the Intel Arc B580 is listed as low as $235. It's also got a cool Intel bundle deal right now where you can choose one of 4 games, and some of these are actually legitimate big new releases that you might be very interested in, like Battlefield 6, Dying Light the Beast, Assassin's Creed Shadows, and Civilization 7. You only get one of those 4 to be clear, but you do get to choose which one. So that does kind of sweeten the deal. Now, do not buy an Intel Arc card if you're on an older system that does not have resizable bar support. Check on your motherboard. You might need a BIOS update. If you can't enable resizable bar, Intel Arc graphics are just not supported and it will be a disastrous experience. So I do need to throw that out there. Also, the B580 is simply just not as performant as the 9060 XT for $30 more. That being said, the B580 does have 12 gigabytes of VRAM, so that's at least nice to have. You don't have to be as concerned about, is my performance bad because I'm running out of VRAM? However, the performance just overall is lower and you're only saving $30. However, I get that at this price point, every dollar certainly counts when we're talking about budget GPUs. Now, if you absolutely have to get down to less than $200, realistically, you are looking at the used market. I was kind of scanning through the used market to see if I could find anything usable under $200. And the 2 main options that I'm seeing here are, well, actually, really the main option I'm seeing here is a 3060. Make sure it's the 12 gigabyte version. I test this out in the latest games and at 1080p and 1440p, granted, especially at 1440p using DLSS upscaling pretty heavily. You can play the latest games, and it's nice to have that 12 gigabytes of VRAM. These are available used for starting around the $200 price point on eBay. You have to be careful because under $200, it's mostly listing like for parts. So careful on that. Now, I am sometimes sponsored by Jawa. I'm not in this particular video, but I do notice that Jawa actually currently has a 12 gigabyte 3060 at $180, and this is sold directly by the Jawa official store, not a third-party seller. So that is currently beating the eBay pricing, so I'm bringing it up here despite this particular video not being sponsored by Jawa, but I do want to disclose that relationship. I do have some videos sponsored by them. Anyway, So that's pretty much where we're at. If you've got less than $200 or about $200, you're in the used market right now. Used 3060s can still play the latest games. If you're buying anything new, B580 is the lowest I would possibly go. But again, make sure you have resizable bar support, and it's really not a lot of performance per dollar. The 9060 XT at $260, the 8GB version offers incredible performance per dollar with that massive issue of 8GB of VRAM. It can still work for the right person and the right kind of play style. Again, past that point, what I really recommend is most people either buy a 9060 XT 16GB or a 5060 Ti 16GB, whichever one fits your budget better. And then if you have additional money, around $500, the 5070 does make a lot of sense to buy right now. And if you can stretch to $600, the 9070 XT makes a lot of sense at $600. Everything past this point, I'm not saying don't buy them. I'm just saying you're getting extremely diminishing returns from a value perspective past this point. In the NVIDIA lineup past this point, the 5070 Ti can make sense. At least you're getting that feature set, and it is a good path tracing GPU, especially at 1440p. But then, yeah, beyond that point, even more diminishing returns. 5090 still makes sense for somebody shooting for just a super high-end 4K build, and you just have crazy amounts of money to throw at things. That's my recommendations for November. I will be monitoring Black Friday sales and posting videos and updates and community posts throughout the month if I'm seeing anything interesting, so do stay tuned. And I do one of these GPU buying videos every month based on that month's current pricing. And all of that. So do, again, stay tuned to the channel if you're interested in that. I hope all of you have an excellent day.